Sandra Bullock and Keanu Reeves had not stood side by side on a stage in years. The world knew them as the stars of Speed, one of the most thrilling action movies of the 90s. Their chemistry on screen made people believe they were truly in love. But off camera, they were just good friends, two actors who had shared a wild ride through Hollywood fame. It was 2018 when they met again for a special event celebrating the 25th anniversary of Speed. Fans still remembered the movie with excitement. It had been more than just a hit. It was a moment in time that brought together two actors who didn't know each other before filming began. Now, decades later, they were sitting on a stage, under bright lights, smiling at each other like old friends reuniting after many years apart. The crowd cheered as they walked in together. People clapped and waved. Some even stood up to take pictures. Sandra looked elegant as always, wearing a soft blue dress that matched her calm smile. Keanu, dressed in a simple black suit, waved shyly, his usual humble self. They sat down across from the host, who was clearly excited to be interviewing such big names. At first, the conversation was light. They talked about how they met for the first time, how nervous they both were during the filming, and how much fun they had working together. The audience laughed as Keanu joked about almost falling off a bus during one of the stunts. Sandra playfully corrected him, saying he did fall off the bus once and she had to pull him back in. Everyone laughed again, enjoying the warm memories. They shared stories about the director, John DeBont, and how strict he was when it came to action scenes. He didn't want fake explosions, Keanu said. If there was an explosion in the scene, we had to be close enough to feel it. Sandra nodded, remembering the days when they would come home covered in dust and sweat, exhausted, but proud of what they were creating. As they spoke, it became clear that their friendship had never faded. Even though life had taken them in different directions, they still respected and cared for each other deeply. The host asked them if they ever thought Speed would become such a classic. Sandra shook her head, saying, "Not in a million years. I thought it was just another movie. But then people started talking about it and suddenly it was everywhere." Keanu agreed. He told the audience that when the movie first came out, he wasn't sure how it would do. "I remember watching it for the first time and thinking, well, at least we tried. And then the next day, everyone was talking about it. It felt surreal." The audience listened closely, hanging on to every word. Some people had seen the movie as kids and now brought their own children to see these stars in person. Others had grown up idolizing them, and now here they were, face to face. But then something changed. The laughter began to fade, replaced by quiet attention. The host asked a question that shifted the mood slightly, something about how their lives had changed after Speed. Sandra smiled politely, but her eyes showed something deeper. She knew where this might go. Keanu, always thoughtful, took a moment before answering. He looked at Sandra, then at the audience. "After Speed, everything changed," he said slowly. "People saw us differently. Suddenly, we weren't just actors. We were part of something bigger." Sandra nodded, adding softly, "And sometimes, being part of something bigger comes with weight you don't expect." There was a pause. Not an awkward one, but a meaningful silence. The kind that makes you lean in closer, wondering what comes next. The host, sensing the shift, gently asked, "Did you ever feel the pressure of sudden fame?" Keanu looked at Sandra again before speaking. "Yes," he said. "But Sandra handled it better than anyone I've seen." That caught everyone's attention. The room grew quieter. There was no joke, no funny story, just honesty. Sandra looked surprised but touched. She gave him a small smile, the kind that says, "Thank you for seeing me." Keanu continued. "She went from being a rising star to being a household name overnight, and yet she stayed grounded. That takes strength." Sandra lowered her eyes for a second, clearly moved. She had gone through so much in her life, loss, heartbreak, joy, and success, but she rarely spoke about it in public. The host, trying to keep the energy positive, asked if they had ever considered doing another movie together. The question brought a spark back into their faces. "Oh, we should," Sandra said with a laugh. Keanu grinned. "Only if it's another action film. I'm not ready for romance yet." The audience laughed again, relieved to return to lighter topics. The mood lifted, and the interview continued with more jokes and happy memories. Still, that brief moment lingered in the air. It was a reminder that behind every smile and red carpet photo, there are real lives, real struggles, and real friendships. By the end of the segment, the crowd gave them a standing ovation. As they walked off the stage, the cameras caught them hugging briefly, like two people who understood each other better than most. No one could have known it then. But that quiet exchange between Keanu and Sandra would soon become one of the most talked about moments in recent celebrity history. Because sometimes the most powerful things said aren't planned. Sometimes the truth slips out in the most unexpected ways and changes everything. The moment had passed, but its echo stayed with everyone in the room. The laughter had returned, the interview continued, and the audience clapped as Sandra and Keanu waved goodbye. But something quiet had shifted, something unseen by cameras, but deeply felt by those who were paying attention. As the crowd slowly made their way out of the event hall, a few members of the production team looked at each other, silently acknowledging that something special had just happened. The host, usually quick on their feet and ready with the next question, had paused longer than expected after Keanu spoke. That pause wasn't planned. It was real, and it said more than words could. Backstage, Sandra took a deep breath before stepping into her car. She smiled at her assistant, gave a small wave to the crew, and climbed into the vehicle. As the city lights blurred past the window, she thought about what Keanu had said. It wasn't just kind, it was true. And sometimes truth is heavier than praise. Keanu, too, walked quietly through the backstage area. He didn't stop for selfies or interviews this time. He simply nodded at people he passed, offered a polite thank you here and there, and disappeared into the night. For someone used to being seen everywhere, he knew how to vanish when he wanted to. The video clip from the event started making rounds online the very next day. Not because of jokes or funny moments, but because of that one sentence. Keanu Reeves had said something off script, something deeply personal, and it struck a chord with millions. It spread across social media like wildfire, not in a wild or dramatic way, but gently, like a soft song shared between friends. People watched it over and over again. Some cried, others felt comforted. Many began to talk not just about the stars, but about life itself, the struggles we all carry, the strength it takes to keep going, and the rare kindness of someone who truly sees you. Sandra Bullock had always been open about her journey through loss. Her longtime partner, Brian Randall, had passed away after a long fight with ALS. It was a private grief, handled with grace and quiet dignity. She hadn't shouted it from rooftops or asked for sympathy. She had simply kept moving forward even when it hurt. And now someone else had noticed. Someone who had stood beside her decades ago on a movie set and still saw her clearly today. In the days that followed, fans flooded social media with messages. They wrote about how much they admired both actors, not just for their talent, but for their humanity. Articles were written, interviews were requested, but neither Sandra nor Keanu gave statements. They let the moment speak for itself. One journalist reached out to a close friend of Keanu's, hoping to get some background on why he had chosen that exact moment to speak so honestly. The friend, speaking off the record, said something simple. He knows what it's like to lose someone. He knows what it's like to feel alone even when the world is watching. He didn't do it for the cameras. He did it because he cared. That line would later be quoted in a magazine article titled, "What Real Friendship Looks Like." It became one of the most read pieces of the year. Meanwhile, Sandra was spotted at a local bookstore weeks later, flipping through poetry books with a soft smile. A fan approached her carefully, saying, "I just want to say, thank you for everything." Sandra looked up, surprised, then gave a warm nod. "You're very kind," she said. Then, almost as an afterthought, she added, "We all carry things. We just try to carry them well." That quote, too, made headlines. Back in Hollywood, the host of the event sat down for a behind-the-scenes interview. When asked about the emotional moment, they hesitated before answering. "I don't think I'll ever forget that," they said. "There I was, trying to do my job, and suddenly I realized I was witnessing something sacred, something real. And the right thing to do was nothing, just let it be." They laughed softly. "I've done hundreds of interviews, but that silence, that was the loudest part." The host's honesty touched people too. It reminded them that, even in showbiz where scripts are rehearsed and every word is measured, there are moments that break through the noise. Moments that remind us we're human. Backstage during the event, one of the stagehands had filmed the exchange on their phone. Not for the internet, just because they were moved. Later, they showed it to their mother, who had recently lost her husband. As they watched Keanu speak with such care, the mother wiped her eyes and said, "That man understands." Stories like that began to surface more and more. People weren't just talking about two actors. They were talking about love, loss, and the power of compassion. In a world often filled with noise, chaos, and drama, this quiet moment stood out like a candle in the dark. A school teacher in Ohio shared the clip with her students during a lesson on empathy. A therapist included it in a workshop about healing. A writer based in London used it as inspiration for a short story about friendship. It had become more than just a viral moment. It had become a message. And yet, neither Sandra nor Keanu seemed to notice, or if they did, they didn't act like it. Life went on. Sandra continued working on new projects. Keanu prepared for the next Matrix film. They didn't chase the spotlight for this moment. They had simply lived it and let the world respond as it wished. But somewhere in the quiet corners of their hearts, they knew what had happened. Two old friends reunited on a stage, sharing a moment that reminded everyone watching that behind every smile, every red carpet photo, every movie premiere, there are lives being lived, with joy, with pain, and with love. And sometimes all it takes is one honest word to change everything. The moment between Keanu Reeves and Sandra Bullock had become more than just a memory from a stage. It was now part of something bigger. People were still talking about it weeks later. Not because it was dramatic or shocking, but because it was real. In a world full of filters and scripts, this felt like a breath of fresh air. Backstage at the event, after the lights had dimmed and the crowd had gone home, the crew packed up quietly. One of the camera operators replayed the footage one last time before shutting down his gear. He watched Keanu turn toward Sandra, speak those soft words, and saw how she responded, not with big emotions, but with deep understanding. It reminded him of a moment he once shared with his own sister years ago, when life had been heavy and kind words were all she needed. He didn't post the clip online. He didn't send it to anyone. He just watched it again, smiled to himself, and shut off the screen. In the days that followed, messages started showing up on social media. Some came from fans who had loved Speed as kids. Others came from people who had no idea who Sandra or Keanu were, but had seen the clip and felt something stir inside them. One message read, "I lost my mom last year. No one really talks about grief unless they have to, but watching that moment, I felt seen." Another said, "I've never met either of these people, but right now, I feel like they understand me." A young woman posted a video response where she held up a photo of her and her best friend. She spoke softly into the camera. "We haven't talked in months," she said, "but maybe it's time I call her again." These stories weren't planned. They weren't promoted. They simply grew, like seeds planted in quiet soil waiting for the right light to bloom. Sandra, meanwhile, had returned to her normal routine. She spent time with her kids, went for morning runs, and worked on a new film project. Her assistant noticed that she seemed more at peace lately, though she never mentioned the event directly. Still, sometimes late at night, she would look at old photos of Speed, smiling at memories of long days on set and the bond she and Keanu had built. Keanu, too, kept living his life with the same calm presence he always had. He walked through neighborhoods without bodyguards, stopped to chat with strangers, and visited bookstores just to browse. A fan once approached him nervously and asked if he remembered saying something meaningful to Sandra. He blinked slowly, then gave a small smile. "I remember caring," he said simply. That was enough. Back in Hollywood, journalists began reaching out to friends, co-workers, and even former assistants, trying to learn more about the history between Sandra and Keanu. But no one had much to say. There was no scandal, no hidden drama. Just two actors who had once shared a journey and had grown to respect each other deeply. One reporter called an old makeup artist who had worked on Speed. The woman laughed gently over the phone. "They were so young back then," she said. "So full of energy, but also nerves. Neither of them knew what was coming next, but you could tell they looked out for each other." She paused, thinking back. "There was one day," she continued, "when Sandra had just gotten some bad news about her family. She tried to hide it, but Keanu noticed. He didn't make a big deal about it. He just sat with her during lunch. Didn't talk much, just stayed there. And I think that meant more than anything else." The reporter wrote that story, and it got shared widely. Readers left comments like, "That's what kindness looks like. Sometimes silence says more than words. This is why we love them, not just for their talent, but for their hearts." Meanwhile, Keanu was spotted walking through a park in New York. A man sitting on a bench recognized him and offered a polite nod. Keanu sat down beside him and asked, "How are you today?" They talked for a few minutes. Nothing serious, just casual conversation. When Keanu stood up to leave, the man thanked him. Not for the chat, but for being kind in a world that often forgets how. Later that week, Sandra appeared on a podcast hosted by a close friend. The host, knowing the interview would be listened to by thousands, asked gently, "What was going through your mind when Keanu said that?" Sandra looked thoughtful. She didn't answer right away. Then she said, "It was like someone finally turned on a light in a room I'd been walking through in the dark." Her voice was steady, but her eyes showed emotion. "He didn't try to fix anything," she added. "He just let me know I wasn't alone." That line was played again and again online. People saved it. They sent it to friends who were struggling. Some printed it out and stuck it on their fridge because sometimes that's all we need, to know we're not alone. Backstage at another event months later, a young actress was getting ready for her first red carpet. She was nervous, excited, and scared all at once. Her manager gave her a pep talk, reminding her to smile and stay confident. Then, unexpectedly, Keanu walked by. He stopped when he saw her and gave a warm smile. "You? Okay?" he asked. She nodded, then hesitated. Just trying not to mess up." He chuckled softly. "You'll do fine. Just be kind to everyone. That's the most important thing." And with that, he walked on. The young actress watched him go, then turned to her manager. "Was that Keanu Reeves?" she whispered. Her manager grinned. "Yeah, and now you've met the nicest guy in Hollywood." Across town, Sandra was at a local coffee shop signing autographs for a few fans who had recognized her. One girl handed her a drawing she had made of Speed. Sandra studied it with a smile. "This is really good," she said. The girl beamed. "Thank you, you're my favorite." Sandra knelt down slightly. "You know what? Kindness is what makes you unforgettable. Not fame, not money, just being kind." The girl hugged her tightly before leaving. Outside, the sun was setting. Life kept moving forward, as it always does. But somewhere in the hearts of many, that quiet moment between two old friends still echoed. It had started as a simple reunion on a stage. But it had become something far greater, a reminder that behind every public face, there is a private life, that healing can come from unexpected places, and that sometimes all it takes is one person to see you clearly, to remind you that you matter, and that is a gift beyond measure. Time passed, but the memory of that quiet moment on stage still lingered in people's hearts. For many, it wasn't just about Sandra Bullock or Keanu Reeves. It had become something more. A reminder that behind every smile, there is often a story we don't know, that even the strongest people carry pain, and that sometimes the kindest thing anyone can do is simply see someone for who they really are. Backstage at another event months later, a young host was preparing to interview a group of actors. She was nervous. This was her first big show. As she rehearsed her lines, she watched a video on her phone, the clip of Keanu speaking to Sandra. She had seen it before, but tonight it felt different. She thought about how he hadn't said anything loud or dramatic. He hadn't made a speech. He had just spoken from his heart, and in doing so, he had changed the whole mood of the room. She remembered reading interviews where people said they cried watching it. Others said it helped them feel less alone. As she got ready to walk on stage, she whispered to herself, "Be kind. Listen more than you speak." That night, during the live show, she did just that. When one of the guests hesitated before answering a question, instead of jumping in or moving on, she waited, gave them space, and when the guest finally spoke, it turned into one of the most honest and touching moments of the evening. Later, after the cameras were off, one of the crew members smiled at her and said, "You handled that like a pro." She shook her head. "No," she said softly. "I just remembered what I once saw two stars do. They didn't try to impress, they just cared." In Hollywood, where fame often shines brighter than truth, moments like these were rare, but they mattered. Meanwhile, Keanu was back in New York walking through Central Park. A man sitting on a bench recognized him and gave a small nod. Keanu sat down beside him without saying much. The man looked tired, worn out by life. "You okay?" Keanu asked gently. The man shrugged. "Just trying to keep going." Keanu nodded like he understood. Because he did. They sat together for a while, not talking much, just sharing silence. Sometimes that's all someone needs. After a few minutes, Keanu stood up. He placed a hand on the man's shoulder and said, "You're not alone." Then he walked away, blending into the city again. Back home, Sandra was cooking dinner with her kids. Her youngest handed her a school project, a short essay titled, "My Hero." She read it quietly. In it, her child wrote about how proud they were of her, how strong she was, how she always tried to help others, even when things weren't easy. Sandra blinked back tears and pulled her child close. Later that night, she sat outside on the porch with a cup of tea. She thought about Brian, about the years they had shared, about the love they had built, and the loss that followed. She missed him deeply, but as time went on, she had learned that grief doesn't mean forgetting. It means carrying the love forward, into everything you do. And then she thought of Keanu, of that night on stage, of the way he had seen her, not just as a star, but as a person, and how much that had meant. She texted him a simple message. "Thank you for seeing me." He replied almost instantly, "Always." That was enough. Across the country, a therapist used the story in a session with a client who was struggling with loss. She played the clip and asked, "What do you see?" The client watched silently, then said, "I see someone being seen." The therapist smiled. Exactly. They talked about how healing happens, not always through grand gestures, but through quiet understanding, through knowing that someone else knows your pain even if they don't say much. Later that week, the client sent the clip to a friend who was going through a hard time, with a note. "This reminded me of you. You're not alone." And so, the ripple continued. At a high school in Texas, a drama teacher showed the clip to her students, not because it was about acting, but because it was about humanity. She asked them to write about a time when someone truly saw them. One student wrote, "My dad left last year. I didn't talk about it, but my best friend noticed. One day she just hugged me and said, 'You don't have to be okay.' And somehow that made me feel better." Another wrote, "Sometimes I pretend I'm fine, but inside I'm not." Watching this made me think maybe it's okay to let people see the real me. The teacher read those words with pride. She knew that learning to be human was just as important as learning to perform. Backstage at a theater in London, an actor preparing for a role watched the clip again. He had been feeling pressure to always look perfect, to act right, to sound right. But watching Keanu speak so honestly reminded him that the most powerful moments aren't planned, they're lived. During the performance that night, when his character broke down on stage, he didn't hide it. He let the emotion come through. And when the curtain fell, the audience gave a standing ovation. Later, someone asked him how he did it. He smiled and said, "I stopped pretending." In a small town in Canada, a mother recovering from surgery watched the clip with her daughter. She had been trying to hide how tired she was, how much pain she was in. But after watching Keanu speak, she turned to her daughter and said, "I'm not okay all the time." Her daughter hugged her and said, "I know, but I'm here." And that changed everything. Because sometimes we spend so much time pretending we're fine that we forget it's okay not to be. Back in Los Angeles, a journalist was writing a piece about the lasting impact of that night. He reached out to people who had seen the clip, asking why it moved them so much. One woman answered, "Because it reminded me that kindness is never wasted. Even a small word can change someone's day or their life." Another wrote, "It reminded me that celebrities are people too. They hurt, they heal, they care." A teenager added, "I used to think stars were untouchable, but now I know. They feel just like us." And that was the point, because in the end, none of us are so different. We all want to be seen, to be heard, to be loved, even when we're not perfect. And sometimes all it takes is one quiet moment to remind us of that. As the sun set over Hollywood one evening, Keanu was walking home from a bookstore. He paused at a crosswalk looking up at the sky. A fan approached carefully. "Can I say something?" they asked. Keanu nodded. "I just wanted to thank you for that moment with Sandra. It helped me." He smiled warmly. "I'm glad." They didn't ask for a photo or autograph, just thanked him and walked on. Keanu kept walking, hands in his pockets, eyes on the road ahead, and somewhere across town, Sandra was tucking her kids into bed. She looked at her phone and saw a new message from Keanu. "You're stronger than you know." She smiled, closed her eyes for a second, and whispered, "Thank you." And in that quiet moment, both of them knew. They had done something good. Not for the world, not for the cameras, but for each other. And that was enough. Time moved forward as it always does. Seasons changed. New movies came out. The world kept turning. But for many people, that quiet moment between Keanu Reeves and Sandra Bullock still echoed in their hearts. It had started as a simple reunion. On stage, two old friends remembering a film they made decades ago. But what Keanu said and how he said it had touched something deeper than anyone expected. It wasn't planned, it wasn't rehearsed, it was just real. And sometimes, real moments are the ones that stay with us the longest. Backstage at another event months later, a young woman stood nervously in front of a mirror. She was about to walk on stage for her very first interview. Her hands were shaking. She looked at her reflection and whispered to herself, "Just be kind." She remembered watching Keanu speak so gently to Sandra. She remembered how silence could speak louder than words, and she thought, if they can do it, maybe I can too. When the time came, she stepped onto the stage with confidence she didn't know she had. As she asked her questions, she listened more than she spoke. She let pauses happen, she didn't rush. And by the end of the interview, the guest smiled warmly and said, "You handled that beautifully." The audience clapped. The cameras turned off. And the young woman walked away knowing she had done something right. Not flashy, not loud, but meaningful. Because kindness doesn't have to shout to be heard. Meanwhile, Keanu was back in New York, walking through the city like he always did. A man sitting on a bench recognized him and gave a small nod. Keanu sat down beside him without saying much. They didn't talk about fame or movies. They talked about life, about loss, about love that never really leaves even when the person is gone. After a while, Keanu stood up and placed a hand on the man's shoulder. "You're not alone," he said softly. Then he walked on, disappearing into the crowd again. Back home, Sandra was making dinner with her kids. One of them was having a rough day. Nothing big, just the kind of day where everything feels heavy for no reason. Sandra noticed. Not because her child said anything, but because she knew the signs. She pulled out 2 chairs at the kitchen table and sat down. "Hey," she said gently. "Some days are harder than others. That's okay." Her child looked up, eyes full of emotion. "You know?" Sandra smiled. "I do, and you don't have to pretend. You can feel whatever you feel." That night, after the dishes were done and the house was quiet, Sandra sat outside under the stars. She thought about Brian, about the years they had shared, about the pain of losing him, and about how slowly, piece by piece, life had started to feel whole again. She thought about Keanu, about that night on stage, about the way he had seen her, not just as a star but as a person, and how much that had meant. She opened her phone and sent him a message. "Thank you for being someone who sees." He replied quickly, "Always." That was enough. Across the country, a school teacher showed the clip to her students again. This time, she asked them a new question. What can we learn from this? One student raised her hand. That everyone has something going on, even people who seem strong. Another added, that kindness doesn't cost anything, but it means everything. A third said, that sometimes the best thing you can do is just listen. The teacher smiled. All true. Later that week, one of the students wrote a note to a classmate who had been acting distant lately. The note read, "I see you. If you ever want to talk, I'm here." And that simple act of kindness started a chain. Others followed. Slowly, the classroom became a place where people felt seen. Because once you learn how powerful it is to be understood, you start wanting to give that gift to others. In a hospital room far away, a nurse played the clip for a patient who had been feeling alone. The patient watched quietly, then wiped a tear from their eye. "I needed that," they said softly. The nurse held their hand. "We all do. Sometimes just knowing someone cares makes things easier." Outside, the sun rose. Over the city, life kept moving forward. People kept living, loving, healing, and growing. Backstage at a theater in Chicago, an actor preparing for his role watched the clip again. He had been struggling with self-doubt, wondering if he was good enough. But seeing Keanu speak so honestly reminded him that strength isn't about perfection. It's about showing up, even when you're not sure of the outcome. During the performance that night, when his character broke down on stage, he didn't hold back. He let the emotion come through, and when the curtain fell, the audience gave a standing ovation. Later, someone asked him how he found the courage to be so open. He smiled and said, "I remembered that being real is more powerful than pretending." In a small town in Florida, a mother recovering from surgery showed the clip to her teenage daughter. "I used to think I had to hide my pain," she said, "but watching that reminded me that it's okay to let people see the truth." Her daughter hugged her tightly. "I'm glad you told me," and that changed everything. Because sometimes we spend so much time trying to be strong that we forget it's okay to be human. Back in Los Angeles, a journalist was wrapping up a feature about the lasting impact of that night. He reached out to fans asking what the moment had meant to them. One woman answered, "It reminded me that kindness is never wasted. Even a small word can change someone's day or their life." Another wrote, "It reminded me that celebrities are people, too. They hurt, they heal, they care." A teenager added, "I used to think stars were untouchable, but now I know. They feel just like us." And that was the point. Because in the end, none of us are so different. We all want to be seen, to be heard, to be loved, even when we're not perfect. And sometimes all it takes is one quiet moment to remind us of that. As the sun set over Hollywood one evening, Keanu was walking home from a bookstore. He paused at a crosswalk looking up at the sky. A fan approached carefully. "Can I say something?" they asked. Keanu nodded. "I just wanted to thank you for that moment with Sandra. It helped me." He smiled warmly. "I'm glad." They didn't ask for a photo or autograph, just thanked him and walked on. Keanu kept walking, hands in his pockets, eyes on the road ahead. And somewhere, across town, Sandra was tucking her kids into bed. She looked at her phone and saw a new message from Keanu. "You're stronger than you know." She smiled, closed her eyes for a second and whispered, "Thank you." And in that quiet moment, both of them knew they had done something good. Not for the world, not for the cameras, but for each other, and that was enough.